Okay, in this video, we're actually going to look at different kind of data. And so first way to classify data is classify as categorical and quantitative data. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on what are the categorical data and quantitative data. So the data can be further classified as being categorical or quantitative. So keep in mind the categorical can also be called qualitative data. So qualitative data. So the statistical analysis that is appropriate depends on whether the data for the variable are categorical or quantitative. So here we are building the foundation for chapter 2, the graphical display. So when we look at a different kind of chart, you actually have to understand what kind of data you're analyzing, because the method you can use to analyze categorical data sometimes is different from the method you can use to analyze the quantitative data. Therefore, in this first chapter, we build our foundation so that you can correctly distinguish categorical from quantitative data. And when we move on to chapter 2, and then you will be able to identify the right method for certain data. So, what is categorical data? So, for the categorical data, it means the label or names used to identify an attribute of an element. So, if that data is used label or name to identify the values, so that usually considered as a categorical data. So, for instance, your student ID, although they are numbers, they actually is the combination of different numbers to identify unique individuals. Therefore, they are actually categorical data. And also, like I mentioned before, like eye colors, your class standing, so they are all belong to category data. So I give you this example is because to want to let you know that the category data can be numeric and non-numeric. We only can use nominal or ordinal scale measurement to measure the category data. So this is very important. So in this part is very important because it's literally related to how you're going to apply the statistics and analyze the data. But the first step, you have to know the characteristic of different kind of data. And so keep in mind when you work on your multiple choice, the quiz, and also the exams. So we do have questions and to ask you the characteristic of the categorical data. So first of all, if I give you a variable, you have to be able to identify whether they are categorical or quantitative. Second, you have to be able to understand that for categorical data, you can use either nominal or ordinal scale measurement to measure it. The last you have to know is the categorical data can be numeric and non-numeric. So if you, in order to help you to remember what I just said, to try to remember some examples. As I said, like the student ID, your student ID, so that is a number, so that's numeric, but that is identify you, so that is category data. So non-numeric, so obviously like gender, your eye color, class standing, so there are all the examples considered as a non-numeric. So this is category data. So for the quantitative data, so if it is not category data, it has to be quantitative data. So therefore, we don't spend time to define what is quantitative data. Instead, we look at the subcategory for the quantitative data. So when we look at quantitative data, we have two subcategories. So depends on how you ask your question. If you ask how many, and so you will obtain the data is considered as a discrete quantitative data. If you ask how much, the number you collected is considered as continual quantitative data. So for instance, if you ask how many bottles of water do you drink every day? You say 2 bottles, 3 bottles. Obviously, they are all integers, so that will be a discrete quantitative data. If you ask how much money you make, $2.35 an hour, or 7.25 dollar an hour, 11.33 dollar per hour. So obviously it can be any positive integers, any positive numbers. So that is considered continual quantitative data. Like I said, depends on how you ask the question, and then you will obtain different kind of quantitative data. So we look at quantitative data, it has to be numeric. It cannot be non-numeric. So you cannot say quantitative can be gender. No, that's not right. So the quantitative data has to be numeric. So it has to be number. So so to summarize what we just learned, so to combine the different type of data with the scale of the measurement, we generate rise to this chart. Generally speaking, the data can be categorized as categorical or quantitative. Categorical, also called qualitative data. So it is a categorical data. It usually can be either numeric or non-numeric. However, if we deal with quantitative data, it has to be numeric. And so if we know the data we're analyzing, and you have to probably use the skill measurement to measure it. So if you're handling the categorical data, you can either use nominal or ordinal to measure it. If you deal with the quantitative data, you can use either interval or ratio to measure it. You cannot use nominal and ordinal to measure the quantitative data. The same, you cannot use the interval or ratio to summarize your categorical data. So this is the one way to classify the data. So next, I will teach you another way to identify the data and also identify the limitation of this class. So look at these two examples. So both are involving collecting data, collecting the permits. So look at the first example. Data detailing the number of building permits issued in November 2013 in each of the county of Ohio. I want to highlight two things in this example, the time and the location. Okay, look at the second example. Still collecting data for permits. Data detailing the number of the building permits issued in Lucas County in each of the last 36 months. Location and the time. So look, both of them are collecting the building permit. But obviously the data you collect are different, right? So they're different. So look at the first example. We see the time and location. And the second, we also see the time and the location. So look at the first example. Are you fixing the location, changing the time, or fixing the time, changing the location? Yes, of course, fix the time. You always collect data for November 2013, but you are changing the location, right? Look at the second example. Are you changing the location, fix the time, or fix the time, changing location? Yes, it's opposite case. So you fix the location, you always collect data from the Lucas County, but you are changing the time. So why use these two examples? Because I want to identify two different types of data. So this is another way to classify your data. So the first method, when you collect the data by fixing the time, by changing the location or changing the element, so that data you collected is called a cross-sectional data. And for the second example, you fix location, always go to Lucas County, but your time is changing. So this kind of data collected is considered as time series data. So cross-sectional are collected at the same time, or approximately the same time same point time in time. So this is like your the first example. And the second example I showing you is the time series data. And I want to mention that in this class, for the rest of the semester, we focus on the cross-sectional data. We are not dealing with the time series data. So not dealing with the time series data. I'll show you one more example about time series data. So that will be the last time you see in this class. If you want to learn more about time series data, you can take another class called economic forecasting. So you can see this example for the time series data. So there is one very interesting characteristic when you are using a diagram to show the time series data. That is your horizontal axis always time. Like here is the date, and the vertical axis is average price per gallon for the gasoline. So this is time series data. So you look at as time change, how the value will change. So for instance, when you look at the stock price for one specific stock, the Google stock called the Alphabet, and then you look at different time across different time, how the price change. So that data also considered as a time series data. Like I said, in this class, we are focusing on the cross-sectional data. So therefore, don't spend too much time on the time series data. But since we're in the first chapter, you have to be able to clearly identify the time series data from the cross-section data. So it will be in your quizzes as well. So make sure before you take the quiz, review the concept we're learning here and able to distinguish these two different kinds of data. In our next video, we're going to focus on different kind of statistics. So we have two different kinds of statistics. All the statistic can be used for two different functions. So we're going to look at in next video.